Millfield looked like any peaceful small town from the outside. White church steeple rising above the trees, friendly faces at the general store, children playing in grassy yards. But beneath this picture-perfect surface, something wasn't right. When 7-year-old Noah Jenkins took Pastor Wilson's hand that fateful Sunday, walking away from his screaming mother toward the forest edge, nobody stopped them. The congregation watched, some with tears of joy, others with uneasy silence. They disappeared into the tree line as Sarah Jenkins collapsed on the church steps. Nobody could imagine what horrors the forest would eventually reveal, or that the nightmare was only beginning. Before we begin, these stories are more than just words to me. I pour my whole heart into crafting them. Your subscription means everything to know you're here with me. Thank you. Millfield wasn't on any tourist maps. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, the town's heart was the New Dawn Church, where Pastor Robert Wilson had preached for nearly 30 years. With his silver hair and thundering voice, he held the community in his grip. "He speaks directly to God," people whispered. 7-year-old Noah Jenkins sat in the front pew every Sunday, wide eyes fixed on Pastor Wilson. The boy was small for his age, with a shock of brown hair that never stayed combed, and a habit of drawing strange symbols in his school notebooks. "The pastor showed me," he would say when his mother Sarah asked about the twisted shapes that looked like stars inside circles. Sarah Jenkins had moved to Millfield 5 years earlier, after her husband's death. A single mother, she relied on the church community, but couldn't shake her growing unease about Pastor Wilson's special interest in her son. "Noah has been chosen," the pastor told her, after services one day, his hand heavy on the boy's shoulder. "He sees beyond the veil." That night, Noah woke screaming about the angel with black eyes. He wasn't the only child having nightmares, but parents in Millfield didn't discuss such things, especially not about their beloved pastor. They looked away when he took children for private prayer sessions in the church basement, where the windows were covered with thick red curtains. Sunday, April 16th, 2000 dawned cold and gray. Rain threatened, but never fell, leaving the air thick with waiting. The church bells rang at 10 a.m. sharp, calling the faithful to service. Sarah almost kept Noah home that morning. Something felt wrong, a mother's instinct screaming warnings she couldn't explain. "We have to go, Mommy," Noah insisted, already putting on his navy suspenders. "Pastor says today is special." The church was packed, every pew filled with familiar faces turned expectantly toward the pulpit. When Pastor Wilson emerged, he wasn't wearing his usual dignified robe but a simple white garment that looked ancient. "The end times are upon us," he announced, slamming his palm on the pulpit. The congregation gasped collectively. "I've received divine revelation. God has shown me what must be done to save our souls." His sermon built like a fever, words tumbling faster as sweat beaded on his forehead. He spoke of sacrifices and salvation, of vessels and purity. Sarah clutched Noah's hand tighter with each passing minute. "The Lord has chosen his pure vessel." Pastor Wilson's voice cracked as he pointed directly at Noah. "This child will lead us through the darkness." The congregation turned to stare. Some were weeping, others nodding in solemn agreement. Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her. After the final hymn, Pastor Wilson descended from the pulpit and walked directly to Noah. He extended his hand. "Come, chosen one. God waits for us." Noah reached back without hesitation.
"No."
Sarah lunged forward, grabbing for her son. "Noah, stay here." The pastor's fingers closed around Noah's small hand. He pulled the boy toward the side door that led to the woods behind the church. "He belongs to God now," Pastor Wilson announced, his voice eerily calm. "Stop him!" Sarah screamed, pushing through the crowd. "He's taking my son." But instead of helping, 2 church elders caught Sarah's arms, holding her back. The congregation formed a wall between her and Noah. "Let God's will be done," someone whispered in her ear. Through gaps in the human barrier, Sarah watched her son walking away, hand in hand with the pastor, disappearing toward the waiting forest. "My son has been kidnapped." Sarah's voice echoed through the Millfield police station 3 hours later. The desk sergeant barely looked up from his paperwork. "Mrs. Jenkins, we've been through this," Sheriff Tanner said, emerging from his office. "Pastor Wilson left a note saying they're on a spiritual retreat. There's no crime here." A note, written by him. "Noah is 7 years old. He can't consent to go anywhere." The sheriff, who sat 3 rows back at New Dawn Church every Sunday, sighed heavily. The pastor has taken kids on retreats before. They always come back filled with the Holy Spirit. But Sarah knew this was different. The look in Pastor Wilson's eyes hadn't been holy, it had been hungry. When 3 days passed with no sign of Noah or the pastor, even Sheriff Tanner had to act. Officers searched the woods, but found nothing. The pastor's small house sat empty, immaculately clean. "It's like he was planning to leave," one deputy commented. By the end of the week, missing persons reports were filed. The FBI was notified. News vans parked outside the church. Sarah couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She spent hours in Noah's room, clutching his teddy bear, staring at his drawings pinned to the wall. The strange symbols seemed to swim before her eyes. On day 6, she broke into the church. The basement was locked, but Sarah had borrowed a crowbar from her neighbor's garage. The wood splintered around the deadbolt. The smell hit her first incense, and something coppery beneath it. The walls were covered with the same symbols from Noah's drawings, but larger, painted in dark red. In the center of the room stood a stone altar. Sarah found a hidden drawer beneath it containing a leather-bound journal. The handwriting inside wasn't Pastor Wilson's. It was dated 1973 and mentioned the first vessel and the glorious sacrifice. The final entry read, "The shepherd has chosen me to continue his work. I will not fail." When Sarah showed the journal to Sheriff Tanner, he finally looked worried. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "Does it matter? Read it. This has happened before." As the investigation intensified, the church congregation turned against Sarah. "You've brought shame to our community," they whispered in the grocery store. "You've questioned God's chosen leader." Late one night, Sarah was searching through old church records when she found a faded map with locations marked in the forest. One spot was circled heavily, with a note in the margin, "The sacred cave awaits the chosen." Dawn was breaking as Sarah grabbed her flashlight and headed into the woods alone. The forest swallowed Sarah's calls for Noah. Day after day she returned, following game trails and old logging roads, searching for the location marked on the map. Sheriff Tanner's half-hearted search parties had long since disbanded. The FBI agent assigned to the case called it a probable parental abduction and focused on tracking Pastor Wilson's non-existent bank activity. By summer's end, the church had a new pastor. The congregation pretended nothing had happened. Children were forbidden from mentioning Noah's name. On the 1-year anniversary of the disappearance, Sarah stood on the church steps with Noah's photo, begging for information. No one met her eyes. She was Millfield's ghost now, the grieving mother everyone wished would just disappear. She didn't disappear. She moved. Sarah sold her house in town and used the money to buy a small cabin on the forest edge. The previous owner had been a hunter who'd mapped every inch of the surrounding woods. His notes covered her walls now, next to her own growing collection of maps. 3 years passed, then 5, then 10. Sarah's hair grayed. Lines etched themselves around her eyes. The townspeople called her the forest woman and told their children she was crazy. "Sheriff, you need to see this," Deputy Martinez said one morning, in 2007, placing a file on Sheriff Tanner's desk. "I've been looking into similar cases in neighboring counties. Inside were reports of 5 missing children across 3 decades. Each disappearance followed the arrival of a visiting preacher. Each child was between 6 and 8 years old. "This is ancient history," Tanner said, closing the file. Martinez took the file to Sarah instead. "I believe you," the young deputy told her. "Something evil happened here." With Martinez's help, Sarah expanded her search. They found fragments, a child's shoe near a creek bed in 2009, the torn remains of what might have been a white ceremonial garment in 2011, strange arrangements of stones in circular patterns throughout the forest. In 2013, an elderly woman named Margaret Fowler reached out to Sarah. She'd been a church secretary in the 1960s. "There were others before Pastor Wilson," Margaret whispered, her hands shaking around her teacup. "They called themselves Shepherds of the Final Dawn. They believed the apocalypse could only be prevented through—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Through what?" Sarah pressed. "Sacrifice," Margaret finally said. "The sacrifice of innocence." The next day, Margaret was found dead in her bathroom. Natural causes, Sheriff Tanner declared, refusing an autopsy. By 2015, Sarah had identified 7 children who had disappeared across 5 decades. She'd found a pattern in the woods. All the stone arrangements formed a massive spiral when mapped, centering on an area of dense forest she hadn't yet explored. Deputy Martinez was promoted to a neighboring county. Sheriff Tanner retired. The new sheriff, a woman named Reynolds, had no connection to the church and reopened Noah's case file. "This should never have been closed," she told Sarah, reviewing the evidence. "We're going to find out what happened." In the winter of 2018, Sarah fell and broke her hip while searching the forest. During her hospital stay, she received an anonymous letter containing a single Polaroid photo, a cave entrance partially hidden by brush. On the back, someone had written, "They never left." Sarah recognized the rock formation from her maps. It was in the one area she hadn't been able to reach, a steep ridge requiring equipment she didn't have. As soon as she could walk again, Sarah showed the photo to Sheriff Reynolds. "We need a proper search team," Reynolds said, "with climbing gear." But budgets were tight, and the county commissioners, many of them still New Dawn Church members, blocked the funding request. "It's been almost 20 years, they said. Let it go." Sarah couldn't let it go. Noah would be 27 now. Sometimes she tried to imagine his face as an adult, but she could only see the 7-year-old who had walked away hand in hand with evil. In late October 2020, a hunter named James Reeves was tracking a wounded deer when the ground gave way beneath him. He fell 10 feet into darkness, landing hard on damp stone. When his eyes adjusted, he saw he was in a cave. His flashlight beam revealed something that made him scramble back up the slope and run 3 miles to his truck. The call came into the sheriff's office at 4:17 p.m. "I found bones," Reeves gasped. "Small bones, and symbols painted everywhere, like something from a horror movie." Sheriff Reynolds assembled a team by nightfall. Sarah insisted on coming along. 20 years of searching had led to this moment. As they approached the cave entrance, Sarah felt a terrible certainty settle in her chest. She would finally learn what happened to her little boy. Yellow police tape marked the cave entrance. Forensic technicians in white coveralls moved carefully through the space, placing numbered markers next to items of interest. The cave mouth had been hidden for years, exposed only when heavy rains caused a landslide. "You need to prepare yourself," Sheriff Reynolds warned Sarah, standing at the perimeter. "What we've found so far is disturbing." Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber. The walls were covered with the same symbols from Noah's childhood drawings, painted in what the text confirmed was blood, decades of it, layer upon layer. "We've identified at least 3 distinct areas," the lead forensic investigator explained, pointing as she spoke. "The entrance chamber with the symbols, a living area deeper in, and what appears to be a—" She hesitated. "A what?" Sarah demanded. "A ceremonial space. An altar room." The living area contained remnants of long habitation, rusted food cans, a collapsed cot, weathered clothing. Item 311. A technician called out, carefully brushing dirt from a small object. Sarah recognized it immediately. A child's shoe, Noah's shoe, with the Superman logo on the side. Nearby, another technician cataloged Item 12, a weathered Bible with Pastor Wilson's name inscribed on the cover. Sheriff Reynolds held 2 deteriorated photographs recovered from a plastic bag, sealed in a wall crevice. One showed a smiling boy from the 1970s. The other was Noah. "There are more," Reynolds said quietly. 7 children that we've identified so far. The forensic team worked methodically, documenting decades of horror. The carbon dating on the oldest bones went back to 1962. The newest evidence suggested activity as recent as a few months earlier. "Someone's been using this cave recently," the lead investigator noted. "There's fresh ash in the fire pit, newer food containers." The most chilling discovery came when they unsealed a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. The walls of this hidden chamber were covered with handprints, small handprints in dried blood. "These are ritual markings," the forensic anthropologist explained. "Each print appears to have been made after a ceremony." Among the handprints, Sarah found one she recognized, the distinctive shape of Noah's left hand, with the slightly crooked pinky finger he'd broken as a toddler. "He was alive in here," she whispered. "For how long?" The investigators couldn't answer that question yet, but they found Pastor Wilson's journals, dozens of them, meticulously documenting his holy work over decades. The earliest entry was from 1961. "The shepherd has shown me the path. Only through the sacrifice of the pure can we hold back the darkness." The entries became increasingly deranged, describing visions and divine messages. He wrote about selecting children who showed signs of receptiveness to the divine. The most disturbing discovery was a leather-bound book labeled The Continuation. Inside were detailed instructions for rituals and ceremonies, along with a list of names, past vessels, and potential future ones. The final pages contained drawings and writings in a different hand, childish at first, then gradually maturing. "We believe Pastor Wilson wasn't working alone," Sheriff Reynolds explained. "Based on the evidence, he was grooming successors, children he'd trained to continue his work." As the technicians carefully removed items from the cave, Sarah noticed something the others had missed, a series of small marks scratched into the wall near the living area. She recognized them immediately as Noah's counting system, the way he'd marked days on his calendar at home. The marks stopped at 4015. 11 years, Sarah said, her voice hollow. He was counting the days. He was here for 11 years after they disappeared. But where had he gone after that? And where was Pastor Wilson? As if answering her unspoken question, a technician called out from the deepest part of the cave. They'd found a sealed chamber containing a skeleton in rotted white robes. Adult male, approximately 60 years old at time of death, the forensic examiner noted. Been here roughly 9 years based on initial assessment. Pastor Wilson had died in his underground temple. But Noah's remains weren't there. If Wilson died 9 years ago, Sheriff Reynolds said slowly, who's been coming to the cave since then? The forensic team expanded their search, following a narrow tunnel that branched off from the main cave. It twisted deeper into the mountain before opening into a surprising space, a room outfitted like a primitive living quarters, with a wooden platform bed, shelves carved into rock, and a ventilation shaft that explained how someone could survive underground. This is recent, the lead investigator noted, pointing to a calendar scratched into the wall. The markings ended just 2 weeks earlier. They found personal items that didn't match Pastor Wilson's smaller clothing, modern protein bar wrappers, a handheld radio. Someone else had been living here long after the pastor's death. The DNA results came back confirming what they'd feared: remains from 7 different children spanning 5 decades. The oldest victim dated to 1962, the most recent to 1998, 2 years before Noah disappeared. But Noah's remains weren't among them. "We found this," a technician said, carefully unfolding a bundle of papers preserved in a waterproof container. They were drawings done in the unmistakable style Sarah recognized from Noah's childhood, but these were darker, filled with disturbing imagery of ritual scenes. The drawings were dated. The earliest was from 2003, the most recent from just a month ago.
"He's alive,"
Sarah whispered. Noah's been alive all this time. Sheriff Reynolds examined Pastor Wilson's journal entries from his final years. They revealed a chilling evolution. He had been grooming Noah not as a sacrifice, but as a successor. "The vessel has proven worthy," Wilson wrote. "He sees the visions now. The darkness speaks through him. He will be the final shepherd when I return to the divine." The most disturbing discovery came when they found a hidden compartment containing videotapes. The footage showed Pastor Wilson instructing a teenage Noah in ritual practices, the boy's eyes vacant, his movements mechanical. "He brainwashed him," the psychologist consulting on the case explained. "Years of isolation, manipulation, and ritualistic behavior. He created a successor to continue his work." The final tape, dated 9 years earlier, showed an adult Pastor Wilson lying on the altar, with teenage Noah standing over him. "Complete the cycle," Wilson commanded. "Take my place as the shepherd." The tape ended before showing what happened next. As the investigation team prepared to leave for the day, a deputy called out from the cave entrance. He'd found fresh footprints in the mud outside, heading away from the cave and deeper into the forest. "They're recent," he confirmed. "Someone was here watching us." Sheriff Reynolds organized search parties to comb the surrounding forest, but Sarah already knew where to look. She recognized landmarks in the background of Noah's recent drawings: a distinctive lightning-struck tree, a particular rock formation. They pointed to somewhere she hadn't searched in all her years of looking: the far northern ridge, where the county line blurred into unmapped wilderness. The search expanded into its 3rd day. Teams with dogs combed the forest, following trails that seemed to circle back on themselves. Whoever they were tracking knew these woods intimately. "He's toying with us," one of the search team leaders said, frustration evident in his voice. Sarah didn't join the official search. Instead, she studied Noah's drawings with the intensity of someone who'd spent 20 years looking for patterns. One image kept appearing: a cabin with a distinctive crooked chimney, always with 3 birds circling above it. She remembered something from years ago, an old hunter mentioning an abandoned fire lookout on the northern ridge. "Nobody goes there anymore," he'd said. "Too remote. Tower fell decades ago, but the cabin's still standing." While the search teams concentrated on the obvious trails, Sarah hiked along a nearly invisible game path that wound up the steepest part of the ridge. Her 60-year-old knees protested, but determination drove her forward. By late afternoon, she reached a clearing. There stood a small cabin with a crooked chimney. Smoke rose from it in a thin gray line against the darkening sky. Sarah radioed Sheriff Reynolds with her location, then switched off the radio. She couldn't wait for backup. Night was falling, and she'd waited 20 years already. Meanwhile, the investigation at the cave continued. Forensic technicians discovered something troubling. Several items of evidence documented earlier were now missing, including one of Pastor Wilson's journals and a ritual knife. "Someone's been back here," the lead investigator realized. "Someone with access to our crime scene." Sheriff Reynolds immediately ordered a review of the search team members. One name stood out: Thomas Gray, a volunteer who joined the 2nd day. His background check had been rushed, his references never verified. When they pulled his file photo and compared it to age progression images of Noah Jenkins, the resemblance was unmistakable. He infiltrated the search team, Reynolds realized. He's been monitoring our investigation from the inside. They tried reaching Sarah's radio. No response. As darkness settled over the forest, Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the cabin. Through the single window, she could see movement inside, a tall figure moving back and forth, preparing something. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the trees and approached the cabin door. The wooden steps creaked beneath her feet. Before she could knock, the door swung open. The man in the doorway was both familiar and a stranger. He had Noah's eyes, her son's eyes, but set in a gaunt face lined with hardship. His dark hair was cropped short, his body rail-thin but wiry with muscle. He wore a simple white garment, similar to the one Pastor Wilson had worn that final Sunday. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice deeper than she'd imagined it would be. "I've been waiting." "Noah?" Sarah's voice broke on the name. He flinched, slightly. "The boy you knew died long ago. I am the final shepherd now." Despite his words, Sarah saw uncertainty flicker across his face, a momentary crack in his facade. He stepped back, allowing her to enter. The cabin's interior was sparse. A table, a chair, a cot in the corner, but the walls were covered with the now familiar symbols, painted in what Sarah desperately hoped wasn't blood. In the center stood a stone altar, smaller than the one in the cave but identical in design. On the altar lay Pastor Wilson's missing journal and the ritual knife, its blade glinting in the firelight. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever he taught you, whatever he made you believe, it was lies." Noah's laugh was hollow. "Lies? I've seen the truth. I've seen what waits beyond the veil." He gestured to the symbols. "Every sacrifice pushes back the darkness. Every vessel strengthens the barrier." "He killed innocent children," Sarah said, taking a careful step forward. "He kidnapped you." "He saved me." Noah's voice rose. "He showed me my purpose. Do you know what happens when the cycle breaks? Do you know what's coming?" He grabbed a handful of drawings from the table, thrusting them toward her. They depicted apocalyptic scenes. Fire, destruction, monstrous figures consuming human victims. "I've prevented this," he insisted. "Every 7 years a pure vessel must be offered. Pastor Wilson taught me how to select them, how to prepare them." His voice faltered. "How to complete the ritual." Sarah's blood ran cold. Have you taken children?" Noah's eyes dropped. "I was preparing for the next selection. The time is coming again." He touched the knife on the altar. "But I've seen another way. A final solution." Understanding dawned on Sarah with horrific clarity. "You're planning to sacrifice yourself. The most powerful vessel is one who offers himself willingly," Noah recited, as if quoting scripture. "I've prepared for years. Tonight, the cycle ends with me." Outside, the distant sound of search teams calling to each other echoed through the forest. Noah's head snapped up. "They can't stop this," he said, grabbing the ritual knife. "It's too important." "Noah, listen to me," Sarah pleaded, moving closer. "Pastor Wilson was sick. He wasn't receiving divine messages. He kidnapped children for decades. He brainwashed you. You don't understand what I've seen." Noah shouted, tears streaming down his face. "The visions are real. The darkness is coming." "Those weren't visions," Sarah said gently. "They were hallucinations. We found evidence in the cave. Pastor Wilson drugged the children. He drugged you for years." Noah shook his head violently, but doubt was creeping into his expression. If the sacrifices were working, why did he need more children? Why didn't one sacrifice fix everything? Sarah asked. "Because it was never about salvation. It was about his own twisted desires." Noah's hand trembled around the knife. "But I've seen your mind showing you what he programmed it to see," Sarah finished. She was close enough now to touch him. Slowly, she reached out her hand. "I never stopped looking for you. Not for 1 day in 20 years. Something broke in Noah's expression. The knife clattered to the floor as his knees buckled. Sarah caught him as he collapsed, holding her son for the first time in 2 decades. "I don't know who I am," he sobbed against her shoulder. "He took everything from me."
"You are my son," Sarah whispered fiercely. "That's who you are. That's who you've always been."
The cabin door burst open as Sheriff Reynolds and her deputies arrived, weapons drawn. They froze at the tableau before them, Sarah cradling the broken man who had once been her little boy. "It's over," Sarah told them, not letting go of Noah. "He's not going to hurt anyone." As they led Noah out to the waiting vehicles, an elderly man stepped from the shadows of the trees. Sarah recognized him, Deacon Phillips from the old church. "I should have stopped it," the old man said, his voice heavy with decades of guilt. "I knew what Robert was doing. We all did. We just didn't want to see." Noah looked at him with empty eyes. "You watched him take me." "Yes," the deacon admitted, tears streaming down his lined face. "May God forgive us all." The state psychiatric hospital sat on a gentle hill overlooking a lake. Its gardens were well tended, its walls secure but not forbidding. This was where Noah Jenkins had lived for the past year, slowly piecing together an identity beyond the final shepherd. Sarah visited every Sunday, driving 3 hours each way. Today she brought wildflowers from the meadow near her cabin. Noah was waiting in the visitor's garden, looking healthier than she'd seen him since his rescue. "The doctor says I'm making progress," he told her as they walked along the path. "The nightmares are less frequent now." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. The investigation had revealed the full horror of what happened in that cave. 7 children had been sacrificed over 5 decades. 4 other chosen ones, like Noah, had been groomed as potential successors, but only Noah had survived the psychological conditioning. The New Dawn Church had been closed, its remaining elders charged as accessories. The cave had been sealed with concrete, the entrance buried, but the town had created a memorial garden where 7 trees grew in a circle, 1 for each lost child. "Sheriff Reynolds called," Sarah said as they sat on a bench overlooking the water. "Thomas Reeves' case is going to trial next month." Reeves had been the last church elder to be arrested, found hiding in Florida. Noah nodded slowly. "I might be ready to testify." They sat in comfortable silence, watching a family of ducks glide across the lake's surface. Noah was 37 now, his life forever altered by what had happened. But he was alive. He was healing. "Do you think we ever really escape our past?" he asked suddenly. Sarah considered the question. "No," she answered honestly. "But we can learn to carry it differently." As the sun began to set, they walked back toward the hospital together, 2 survivors finding their way forward, scarred but undefeated. That's the end of today's story. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have kept searching for 20 years? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this kind of psychological horror gripped you, hit subscribe for more. Click now to discover our next awesome tale.